If you've ever dreamed of living off dividends, you've probably used a formula like this to determine how much you need invested to pull it off. You take your total living expenses for a year and multiply it by 25. This represents a 4% dividend yield on your investments, which is historically the average yield of the market as measured by the S&P 500, and is also in line with the reputed 4% rule, which states that you can safely withdraw 4% of your investments each year and have it last throughout retirement. So if you want to make $36,000 a year in dividends, which is the median income level for individuals from 2019, according to the US Census Bureau, you need approximately $900,000 invested. And you may think with $900,000 invested in stocks, you're a wealthy individual. However, I'm going to tell you why this approach to living off of dividends will actually keep you poor rather than giving you financial freedom. And the reason for this is that it overlooks a ton of important details that can destroy your dividend income and leave you struggling to make ends meet. These include the fact that it doesn't account for market or dividend risk, it doesn't account for taxes, it doesn't account for non-living expenses or lifestyle changes, and it doesn't leave you with any money to continue investing and growing your wealth. I'm going to expand on all of these details and show you how they'll make you poor if you choose to live off of dividends using a formula like this. Afterwards, we'll consider the right way to live off of dividends to ensure that you can actually achieve that passive income lifestyle without sacrificing financial comfortability. So stay tuned for all of that, as well as a quick look at how you can kickstart your passive income portfolio with some free cash. Let's take a look. When you're building an investment portfolio to produce a livable income through dividends, there are really two approaches to the investing strategy itself. First is arguably the more common and widely endorsed strategy of investing in a total stock market, using something like the S&P 500 index. Second is creating a custom dividend portfolio by handpicking different stocks and investment funds. The total market strategy is mainly susceptible to market risk, while the custom portfolio will also be susceptible to dividend risk. I'll dive into both. The benefit of investing in the total stock market for dividend income is that you're invested into hundreds or thousands of companies at once, so you can rest assured that between all of those companies, you'll continue receiving dividends on a regular basis. However, this doesn't eliminate the overall risks involved with the stock market itself, which can still impact your dividend income. There are countless variables that can impact the market, but the important thing to remember is that crashes, corrections, recessions, and downtrends all do happen. When you've invested into the total market and expect it to pay your living expenses, these events could put you in a really bad spot. For example, let's say you invested in the S&P 500 before the market crash of 2008. During 2008, the S&P 500 paid out 4 quarterly dividends worth about $28 total. Doing some reverse math, this means you needed about 1,285 shares to earn today's median income of $36,000. But in 2009, following the housing crash, the annual dividend payout of the S&P 500 dropped to just under $22. So during that year, your 1,285 shares only produced an income of about $28,000. You've suddenly lost nearly a quarter of your income for the year. If you're relying on this income to pay your bills and living expenses, you may be forced to sell your investments and take money out of the market to pay for necessities. Unfortunately, this is going to put you in an even worse spot because each share you're forced to sell means you're earning less dividend income in the future. Suddenly, you're not able to live off of your dividends anymore, and being forced to sell your investments sets you back even further. So my point is, planning to live off of dividend income with a simple formula built around the yield of the total market can be an unreliable way to plan your dividend income strategy, because the unexpected can and does happen. Furthermore, while the value of the dividends received from the total market gradually increases over time, the dividend yield can be more volatile. This is because the dividend yield is dependent on the share price. As we can see by the dividend yield formula, yield equals the annual dividend amount divided by the share price. So when share prices increase faster than dividend payouts, you'll actually see the yield drop. While this typically won't affect your dividend income if you're already invested, it does change the amount of cash needed to achieve a certain level of income in the future. For example, right now, the dividend yield of the S&P 500 is about 1.3%. This is significantly less than the historical average of 4%, and means you would need to invest $2.7 million today to earn the median income of $36,000 a year. If you don't account for changes in the dividend yield as you're building up your dividend portfolio, you might get to your goal and find that it doesn't actually pay the amount of income you need. And both of these examples are why investors often choose to build their own dividend portfolio that doesn't use a total market approach. With enough stocks and funds, you can still achieve all of the diversification benefits of total market investing, but you're also able to target investments that will produce a higher yield than the S&P 500 or a comparable index. This means instead of yielding the current 1 to 2% of the S&P 500, you can yield 4, 6, 8%, or even higher. And obviously, a higher yield means you'll need substantially less money invested to reach your desired dividend income. For example, you can target individual blue chip stocks like Coca-Cola or McDonald's, both of which have a higher yield than the S&P 500. Or you can target yield-oriented investments like BDCs, MLPs, or REITs, which may offer even higher yields than the blue chip stocks. Last, you could target dividend ETFs or income-oriented ETFs that may trade off growth potential in exchange for larger dividend yields. And while holding enough of these investments can lower your market risk similar to that of the S&P 500, they do come with greater dividend risks. When you pick individual holdings, their failure to deliver the expected dividend can have a huge impact on your dividend income for the year. While there are both businesses and investment strategies that can consistently deliver high dividend yields, this approach can easily turn into hunting for the highest yield possible. When you start investing purely for yield, you're going to jeopardize your dividend income by making riskier investments. And this could put you in a situation similar to a market crash, where you unexpectedly don't have enough dividend income to pay your bills, and you're forced to sell off your stocks. So whichever approach you plan to take for dividend investing, building your expected dividend income around a specific yield can be risky. If that yield ever falls short, you could experience a financial setback that takes years to recover from. Next, we have to talk about taxes, and I know this is not a sexy topic, but it is incredibly important if you're expecting to get 100% of your income from dividends. For example, I know I spend roughly $2,000 a month on living expenses, so I might think I need $24,000 in annual dividend income to live passively. However, this $2,000 is post-tax, and it doesn't consider all the money I might owe on my dividends before I'm able to spend them on my living expenses. And to explore this idea further, it's all going to come down to the topic of qualified dividends. If you're not familiar, qualified dividends are a special category of dividends that receive favorable tax treatment. In order to be considered a qualified dividend, it must be paid out by a US company or a qualifying foreign company. It has to be an eligible business structure under IRS guidelines, which will exclude things like REITs and MLPs, and you must have held the stock that paid that dividend for at least 60 days, or 90 days for preferred stock. If your dividend is a qualified dividend, you're in luck, because you could be taxed as little as 0% on those dividends. The tax rate on these dividends depends on your income level. So as you can see, any single filer earning less than $40,400 a year owes 0% taxes on qualified dividends. This means if you make $0 in income, but earn $40,000 in qualified dividends from your investments, you can enjoy all of that dividend income without any tax obligations. However, if you're still making money from a job, you're collecting non-qualified dividends, and/or the qualified dividends push your total income to over $40,400, you're going to owe taxes. And in these situations, if you're counting on more than $40,000 in dividend income to pay your bills, you need to understand how much dividend income you'll have left after you pay those taxes. And this is where things can get a little complicated and may require some personal research, because you have to consider both your other income sources and your dividend income sources. First, if you're hoping to secure 100% qualified dividend income under $40,000 to avoid taxes, you need to choose your investments carefully. While most investments do pay qualified dividends, this isn't always the case. For example, while the S&P 500, as represented by Vanguard's VOO ETF, did pay dividends that were 100% qualified last year, similar index ETFs pay dividends that weren't entirely qualified, and would therefore come with additional taxes. Even the breakdown within the S&P 500 can change from year to year, so it's important to stay up to date with the tax documents to understand how your dividend income will be taxed. And as I said, REITs and MLPs don't qualify for the qualified dividend treatment, and this is often true for most yield-oriented investments. While the dividends are usually higher, they're often taxed as income, which could be costly if you plan on collecting large amounts of dividends every year. Ultimately, if you don't do your research and determine how much your dividends will be taxed, you could get a nasty surprise when tax season rolls around and you've already spent your allocated dividend income for the year. Then we have another situation where you may be forced to sell some of your investments and suffer from lower dividend income in the future. The next reason that this approach to living off dividends makes you poor is that it doesn't account for non-living expenses. Generally, to calculate how much money you need to live off dividends, you start with adding up your living expenses. So most people will consider the rent or mortgage, car payments, phone bills, and so on. Maybe you even add a little buffer of 10 to 15% to make sure you get a safe estimate for these living expenses. The problem is, this strategy completely overlooks all of the other things you'll spend money on in your life. What if you want to take a vacation? What if you feel like celebrating a special occasion at a nice restaurant? What if your car breaks down and you have to spend a few $100 extra one month? You won't be able to afford any of this if you've only planned for your dividend income to cover your living expenses. And while you may be able to pinch pennies for a few months at a time and make your dividend income a livable income, most of us probably want a little extra to be able to enjoy life. After all, the appeal of living off dividends is being able to escape the rat race and avoid working for a wage every day. So if you jump into living off of dividends without accounting for these extra costs, you'll be trapped in a lifestyle where you can't afford anything and you don't actually get to enjoy the financial freedom you've earned. Similarly, beyond non-living expenses, you need to consider any lifestyle changes that could change your monthly expenses. If you get married, have kids, get a new car, move to a new city, or anything else, your expenses will change and your dividend income may suddenly not be enough to cover them. Some of you might counter this point and say, that's totally fine, I'll just work a part-time job or get a side hustle for that extra income I need. And that could definitely work, but then you have to go back to my previous point and figure out how that's going to affect your overall taxes so you'll still have enough dividend income to cover expenses. But I'm also of the opinion that if you're planning on working anyway, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to withdraw all your dividends and spend them every single month. Instead, find that passion project or side hustle that will pay your bills so you can continue reinvesting your dividends and growing your wealth over time. And that brings me to my last point, which is that living off dividends often sounds like a decision to completely stop investing. With most calculations, you plan to invest the required amount of money that will pay for your living expenses. So once you reach that goal and begin using that dividend income as a replacement for ordinary income, you won't have anything left after paying for your living expenses. And this means that every month you're taking every cent of dividends out of your portfolio, but never putting any new cash to work inside your portfolio. Sure, your stock holdings should continue growing over time, but it almost seems like giving up to just stop investing money after reaching that target dividend income level. Ideally, your dividend income will grow gradually over time with the market, but if you're not continually investing new cash or reinvesting dividends, you won't be building much new wealth. If you plan on only hitting that minimum portfolio value to generate your living expenses, your income will practically flatline and your portfolio growth will slow down too. I will say this may be perfectly suitable for people in their 50s or 60s who are ready to ride out their investments through their final years. But for young people like me, or anyone who wants to pass on wealth to the next generation, this is how living off dividends could actually make you poor. So then the question becomes, how can you actually live off dividends without sacrificing your ability to live comfortably and continue growing your wealth? Unfortunately, it's going to require much more than a simple formula. And I'm not saying this to discourage anyone from striving for financial independence with dividend income, but just to emphasize the fact that there are a lot of different things to consider to make it a reality. First, you need to prepare for any market or dividend risk that might come your way. You may choose to do this by keeping an emergency fund so that you have something to fall back on if things go south for a few months. This will also protect you from having to sell your investments when prices are down. Also, keep in mind that you need to match your portfolio holdings to your risk tolerance. This may require deeper research or consulting a professional, but there are plenty of high-yielding strategies that can help you live off of dividends faster than a simple investment into the total market via the S&P 500. Again, you just have to make sure it fits your overall risk profile and you're prepared for the greater market risks. Next, you need to do a deep dive into all of your income sources and stock holdings to determine what taxes will be taken out of your expected dividend income. This too could require some deeper research or professional advice, but figuring out these numbers is essential for using dividends as the main component or only component of your income. You also need to quantify how much money beyond your living expenses that you'd like to spend on a regular basis. Whether you want to give yourself an annual vacation budget or mimic a salary that you're used to, this is going to be entirely personal preference based on how comfortable of a life you want your dividend income to provide. Also, if you expect to make significant lifestyle changes like getting married or having kids, you may need to completely revisit your dividend strategy to accommodate those changes. Finally, I think you should allocate some of your dividend income to be reinvested into the markets. Like I said, cutting off new cash into your portfolio is practically a death sentence for your portfolio's growth and future income potential. Common financial advice says to invest 10 to 20% of your income, so that would personally be my starting point for reinvesting allocations. All of these considerations will unfortunately require you to invest more money before you're able to fully live off of dividends, but I would argue that it's worth the extra time it takes to live a safe and comfortable life off of dividend income. If you're currently living off dividends or actively working towards that goal, I'd love to hear from you in the comments. Let me know what your strategy is for living comfortably off of dividend income. And if anyone out there is looking to get started with a passive dividend income portfolio, I'd like to quickly recommend the M1 Finance platform. This video isn't sponsored, I've just been using M1 Finance for months and find it to be an outstanding platform for automated and passive investing. You can set your allocations to each holding to stay perfectly weighted across your portfolio. It automatically reinvests dividends evenly across holdings, and there are no fees whatsoever. If you want to try it out, there's a referral link in the description that currently gives you $50 when you open and fund an account. So check that out if you're interested, but in any case, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.